Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be starting our webinar around 1 o'clock. We're going to give people a few minutes to log into Zoom. Sometimes take a little bit. So sit tight and we'll get started soon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's 1 o'clock, but I want to give folks an opportunity to log into Zoom after their lunch break. So we're going to sit tight for another minute or two while folks hop on Zoom. I want to thank you again for joining us today. And if you haven't had an opportunity yet to take a look at our white paper that we published as part of this workshop, it is available on our website. If you type into Google State Water Board Drinking Water Needs Assessment, you'll find our webpage, and a hyperlink to the white paper is on the right-hand side of the screen. Apologies for not having an easy way of getting it to you through Zoom. We do have to disable the chat feature for our webinars. But we do have some additional materials on our website if you're interested in digging in with us today. Okay, let's get started. Thank you for joining us. You are sitting in on a webinar, obviously hosted by the State Water Board. We are going to be discussing our proposed changes to the cost assessment model. This is a third webinar in our webinar series for this year on our cost model rebuild process. We're going to be discussing today something in our model called Other Essential Infrastructure, which is long-term solutions, administrator needs, and other interim solution needs in the model. I want to thank you for joining us today. It is going to get wonky, but that's what we like to discuss. And hopefully you have some thoughts and opinions you can share with us on some of our proposed changes that we're making to the model. I'm going to hop in. I'm actually covering for Moj this morning, or I'm sorry, for the first half of this presentation, and then she'll be hopping on later. My name's Kristen Appold. I'm the senior for the Division of Drinking Water's Needs Analysis Unit. Our unit is responsible for conducting the annual drinking water needs assessment, which the cost assessment is a core component of. Up on the screen is our water board's mission statement. We are encouraged to read this out loud to remind people why we're doing what we're doing. So our mission statement: preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of California's water resources and drinking water for the protection of the environment, public health, and all beneficial uses, and to ensure proper water resource allocation and efficient use for the benefit of present and future generations. For those of you who are participating via Zoom today, thank you for joining. We're hoping that you can participate in one of two ways. You can either raise your hand when we stop for some discussion questions. When you raise your hand, we will unmute you and you can ask your question using your own voice. We love to hear you, so please try that option if you're comfortable. You also have the option of using our Q&A, our question and answer box, where you can type in a question. And when we pause for those discussion periods, we can review those Q&As and share them with the group and try to respond as best we can. We also have people who are joining us from our EPA live webcast. If you're watching from our video.calepa.ca.gov webpage and you'd like to submit a comment or question, you can email us at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. We do have staff monitoring that inbox, and we'll share your question or comment with us so that it can be included in our discussion here today. If you share a question or comment, we're not able to provide a proper response, we will definitely follow up with you afterwards. We really appreciate all feedback that we get and want to work with you to better understand your perspective and to discuss how it may impact either this version of our needs assessment or the future. Okay, we're going to cover quite a bit of material today. I'm going to go over some of the intro topics, and then I'm going to hand things over to Moj on our team, who's going to finish off the rest of the presentation. I'm going to discuss at a higher level our cost assessment and some of the bigger proposed changes that we're making to it. And then Moj is going to dig in to go over some of our additional modeled long-term solutions that we include in the model. We're going to discuss how we model interim solutions. We're going to also cover some of the total cost modifiers and multipliers that we use to adjust our final cost estimates. And then we're going to talk about next steps and where we're going for the 2024 needs assessment. And I want to just do a shout out. I see a few names here in our attendees list of folks who joined us this morning. We did host a webinar this morning giving a very high level overview of the changes we're making to the 2024 needs assessment. And I thank you for joining us for a deeper dive this afternoon into our cost model work. So to get started, I want to provide a background on our cost assessment. For those of you who joined us this morning, some of it might look familiar, but I do want to put a little poll question out there for folks, so bear with me as I launch it. The question is, did you participate in any of the past webinars about the cost assessment model or the needs assessment? Trying to get a sense of how many are familiar with our cost assessment work and the cost model. Give you a few more seconds to fill out the poll. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So it looks like 75% of our participants today on Zoom are familiar with the cost model and the needs assessment and have participated in some of our past webinars. That is fabulous. Thank you for joining us again. But we also have some new folks with us today. I see that there are about 25% are new. So I want to say thank you and welcome for joining us today. We're going to go over what the cost assessment is, and hopefully you're able to follow along. If not, reach out to us. We're happy to meet with you one-on-one and go over anything that we're discussing today. I will point out that you'll see a hyperlink on this PowerPoint presentation, which will be shared with you via email after the webinar is done. If you go here, it's going to take you to our drinking water needs assessment webpage, where we have lots and lots of materials posted on that website around our drinking water needs assessment and all of the methodology white papers that we've been publishing over the last few years that fully documents how we get to where we are in the needs assessment, if you're interested in going on that journey with us. All right, I'm going to launch poll question number 2. Bear with me as I get that set up. Oops, maybe I didn't close out this one. Stop sharing. Here we go. Poll question number 2. Have you read the white paper, Proposed Updates to the Drinking Water Cost Assessment Model, Other Essential Infrastructure, Administrator Needs, and Interim Solutions? We did publish this white paper last week. It was part of our public notice that we sent out to the SAFER list. I will say it's totally okay if you haven't read it yet. We're going to be going over the highlights today. Okay, I'm gonna shut it down and share the results. We do have some folks who read it or skimmed through it, so that's awesome. About 60% of you, and about 40% of you have not, which again, totally okay. That's why we have this workshop. We're gonna go through the highlights of that white paper, but we do want to point you to where it's located. Again, here's the hyperlink to it, and we will share this after the webinar. A lot of what we're discussing today is kind of a summary of what's in that paper. We do go into a lot of detail in the white paper. So if you're interested in data sources, our citations, how we got to the recommendations that you'll see here today, fully documented in that paper and all of our previous white papers, if you're interested. Okay, so let's back up for a moment. Why are we here? What is this? Let's put some context to our discussion. Some of you may be familiar with the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. It was a new funding program that was developed a number of years back as part of our SAFER program. It's a very unique funding source with a lot of really great funding flexibility for drinking water infrastructure and solutions. It is appropriated up to $130 million per year. And when that new fund was created by the legislature, there was a requirement that the State Water Board publish a fund expenditure plan every year that helps to prioritize how that money is spent each year, each fiscal year. And how money is prioritized should be based off of data and analysis drawn from our drinking water needs assessment. I know it's kind of wonky, that's a lot of language in there, but it is the reason why we do the work that we're discussing here today is to help guide important decision making around how we allocate our resources, not just our funding, like this Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, but it also helps us target where our staffing resources are focused, our technical assistance, our administrator assistance, and how we help to identify areas across the state that we want to target with our other partner agencies like the Department of Water Resources and CPUC. The needs assessment is composed of 4 core components, and they're listed here. We look at failing water systems. These are our systems that we have designated as the highest priority communities. These are water systems that are either currently out of compliance or consistently out of compliance and therefore considered failed water systems. We also conduct something called a risk assessment where we're identifying community water systems and schools and state smalls and domestic wells that are at risk of failing. These are our second priority level water systems and communities. And then what we're here to talk about today, we're also required to conduct something called a cost assessment, where essentially we are trying to put a price tag, figuring out statewide what the cost might be to implement long-term and interim solutions for our failing and at-risk communities. We also conduct an affordability assessment where we look at whether or not these communities can afford the long-term and interim solutions that we're identifying in our cost assessment. All of this data and information is provided to the public. It's provided to our SAFER advisory group and many others to help them make good decisions around how we should be prioritizing, again, where we're targeting our SAFER resources. And today we're really focusing on our cost assessment. So this is just a reiteration of what I've been saying over the last few slides. But what I really want to emphasize here is that the results of this cost assessment, again, are used to inform kind of big picture statewide activities. It is not intended to inform local decisions. We do not have enough information about what's happening within each community with data to accurately try to predict what the right long-term and interim solutions are for each community. Our cost assessment is our best guess based on available data and then rolled up across the state. It is not supposed to be a decision-making tool for local communities on how they should be addressing their long-term challenges. I can't stress that enough, and I wanted to make sure we spend some time right now making sure that that is clear. Okay, let's talk about who's included in the cost model in our cost assessment. You heard me talk about it earlier, but it's important to talk about some of the changes that have happened since the last time we conducted our cost assessment, which was back in 2021. Hopefully you can see the color difference on the screen here. The green colors are new as of 2021. So back when we first did our first cost assessment, the failing water systems that were included in our analysis were failing for primary and secondary MCL violations. These are water quality violations. Since we launched that 2021 assessment, we've expanded how we identify failing water systems across the state. We now include E. coli violations, we have treatment technique violations, and monitoring and reporting violations. As you can tell by the titles, some of these are not water quality based, and therefore we really have to think a little bit more broadly about what our long-term solutions are in our model. It shouldn't only be focused on water quality challenges. It has to be broader now. We also look at-risk water systems in our cost assessment. There hasn't been a change to the categories of risk, so there's no green text there. Where there is some change is how we look at our state smalls and domestic wells. Our at-risk state smalls and domestic wells back in 2021 was purely based off of water quality risk. We didn't look at anything else when we were trying to identify high-risk state smalls and domestic wells. But over the last few years, based on stakeholder feedback, we've expanded our analysis of identifying our high-risk state smalls and domestic wells, and we've added new categories of risk like water shortage and socioeconomic risk. Because we now have water shortage risk, for example, we have to look beyond just long-term solutions that are for water quality only. So in our cost model, we're now having to consider new long-term solutions for water shortage risk. Socioeconomic risk is excluded at this time in the model. So I'm going to go over, again, trying to stay high level, the big changes that we're making to the cost assessment compared to what we had in 2021. A lot of what I'm going to be going over here has been covered in previous workshops, which, again, we'll be sharing the links to those recordings and PowerPoints and white papers if you want to dig in on any of those topics. We've been hosting workshops on the cost model, not just this year, we had some last year, and we've been hosting cost model workshops honestly, since 2019. We really believe in developing a methodology that takes into account stakeholder feedback. It is important that we hear from everybody and incorporate your thoughts, ideas, and information into our method. We want it to be robust, and we don't believe that working within a silo within the agency is going to give us the best model. So for those of you who've been participating in our workshops for the past few years, a big thank you. We really appreciate your continued engagement on this. Here's a hyperlink to our webpage where you can find more information on our past reports. Again, our 2021 needs assessment report included a full cost assessment. In 2022, we did a drought infrastructure cost assessment. And then 2023, we had no cost assessment as we started to rebuild the model. But again, you can find a lot more information on our website. Okay, so our model looks at two things. You've heard me say it a few times, but I'm going to keep repeating it. We are looking at long-term solutions. So these are modeled sustainable solutions to address the challenges that we've identified for our failing water systems and for our high-risk or at-risk water systems in state smalls and domestic wells. We also look at interim solutions, but only for a subset of the water systems included in our analysis. We are looking at interim solutions for disadvantaged communities. These are low-income communities to ensure that they have safe drinking water while long-term solutions are being implemented. Again, this is all in our hypothetical cost model world, but that is the reason why we're doing this. We assume, the model assumes, that non-DAC communities can support the implementation of interim solutions on their own, which is why we don't need to create a cost estimate for those communities. It's not really something that is can be budgeted for us at the state. So again, long-term solutions and interim solutions. Let's discuss long-term solutions. I'm going to talk about how the old model back in 2021 used to identify the right or the modeled long-term solution for our failing public water systems. What it did is it identified a failing water system and it said, okay, let's look at all of the possible long-term solutions that we have in our model at the same time. We're going to cost all of these out for each water system. We're going to look at centralized treatment, we're going to look at decentralized treatment, and we're going to look at physical consolidation and develop a cost estimate for each of those. Then we're going to score those and look at the cost estimate and try to find the lowest cost option that is the most sustainable in the long run, giving a scoring rubric that we developed with Sac State and Corona Environmental. And then based on how those different solutions are scored, the model then selects the best modeled long-term solution. The problem with this approach that we discovered once we finalized the assessment and released the results in 2021 was that based on how the decision-making criteria in step 2 worked, it was over-selecting the lowest cost options, which in essence was typically decentralized treatment, point of use, point of entry, over the other solutions, which are more sustainable and in the long run because of the criteria. So what we saw was physical consolidation was not selected for many systems and decentralized treatment was over-selected for a lot of water systems. And we had internal and external stakeholders calling that out, saying, hey, you know, maybe the decision-making within the model needs to be adjusted because it's not aligning with the type of decision-making that we would see the water board advocating for, or what most of our partners would be advocating for these communities. So when we sat down to rethink the cost model, we wanted it to align the decision-making within the model to align with the programmatic priorities of our SAFER program. So for failing water systems, our new proposed cost model will evaluate physical consolidation first. It's not going to look at any other solution and compare it to them. It's going to look at whether or not physical consolidation is viable, looking at both distance and cost viability thresholds. If it is viable, then that will be the modeled long-term solution for that system. If it is not, then we go to our second level, long-term solution preference, which is centralized treatment. This is only for those failing water systems that are failing for water quality issues. If, for example, the water system is failing for monitoring and reporting violations, they don't need treatment. We're going to skip those systems to the end, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But let's just talk about our water quality issues. If centralized treatment is not a viable option in the model, for example, if that water system is very, very small, where centralized treatment would essentially be unaffordable, or that water system is very small and they have high concentrations of certain analytes, we're going to be looking at decentralized treatment. And then we look at additional needs on top of that. So we go from our first priority long-term solution down to our last for step 3. And then we're also looking at additional infrastructure needs, administrator needs, technical assistance needs, etc. in step 4. For our failing water systems that are not failing for water quality issues, they go from step 1 to step 4, essentially. We skip any treatment analysis. Okay, for our at-risk public water systems, it's a much simpler analysis. We are looking again at physical consolidation first. That is aligns with our SAFER program priorities. If that is not viable within the model, then we're looking at additional infrastructure, administrative assistance, technical assistance, and other needs for those locations. Essentially, we are not modeling out new treatment for those systems because they're at risk, they're not failing, and therefore we're not going to model out new treatment. Okay, state smalls and domestic wells, we treat fairly similar to how we are doing this for failing systems. We have, again, physical consolidation is our first step in the process. If that's not a viable option within the model, we're looking at decentralized treatment for those systems, those communities with high water quality risk. And if for whatever reason, if the contamination, the modeled contamination, is exceeding decentralized treatment viability, then we do look at bottled water for those communities to ensure that they have safe drinking water. That is our least preferable long-term solution, and that way the decision-making criteria ensures that bottled water is the last choice within the model. Okay, water shortage. This is the new category. This is something that needed to be added to the cost model since we did not look at water shortage in 2021. We needed to identify long-term solutions for these communities. You guessed it, step 1 is physical consolidation first. We are looking at whether or not it's viable. I see a question in the Q&A, which is asking to define viable. We did host a workshop in July purely on our physical consolidation analysis and how the model determines viability. For public water systems failing and at risk, we look at whether or not they are 3 miles along a road from their boundary to a potential receiving system. That's the distance criteria. We also have a cost viability criteria, which is documented in the paper. I apologize, I don't have it off the top of my head. We also, for state smalls and domestic wells, it's a shorter route. I believe it's a 3/4 of a mile, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong in chat. It's a shorter criteria for state smalls and domestic wells, and they're either within a boundary or for a water system, or they are along the route of a public water system consolidation within the model. So we call it a route intersect consolidation or the distance consolidation thresholds. I know that's kind of wonky. It is all in the white paper on how we make that determination, and there is a cost viability threshold there as well. If physical consolidation is not viable in the model for these high water shortage risk state smalls and domestic wells, then we are costing out a new private well for these locations as a long-term solution. Okay. Just in summary, these are our long-term solutions. So physical consolidation. Again, this workshop was hosted in July, and all of the white papers, presentations, and workshop recording is available on our webpage. We hosted a workshop back in October where we dug in to centralized and decentralized treatment and all of our underlying cost assumptions for all of those different components and how we match different treatment technologies to the failing systems and high-risk systems based on the contaminants that they are failing or high risk for. That's all documented. Go take a look at our white paper. And today, we're going over the remainder of our long-term solution. So we're going to discuss the underlying cost assumptions for the additional needs for new private wells and bottled water. Again, I'll be sharing these slides with you afterwards, but wanted to make it easier for you to find these resources. Again, this is the physical consolidation workshop. We've got a hyperlink to the white paper, webinar, presentation, and recording. And workshop number 2, which was on decentralized and centralized treatment. Our white paper, webinar, presentation, and webinar recording are available here. We are also going to discuss today interim solutions. So again, we're looking at interim solutions for DAC and SDAC. These are disadvantaged or low-income communities for failing water systems and high-risk state smalls and domestic wells. It's important, again, to note that we're looking at these solutions for those communities where especially water quality is the driver for the system to be at risk or failing, because we want to ensure that folks have access to safe water as long-term solutions are being implemented. We're going to be looking at decentralized treatment first as a viable interim solution. And if that is not viable, then bottled water is costed out. And again, today we're going to talk about our cost assumptions for these interim solutions. Okay, so that is a very high level of how we are looking at long-term and interim solutions for the systems included in our analysis, trying to compare it to how we did it in 2021. We're going to start to get into the details in the next section of this presentation, but wanted to get a quick read from you all. Oops, I didn't stop sharing the last poll. Let me go back to poll 3. Wanted to get your thoughts on what we just covered right now on the kind of big picture modifications we're making to the cost model and its decision-making criteria. Okay, going to end the poll. Share the results. It looks like most folks are supportive of our direction. We've got 30% say it sounds good. 70% says maybe, that they want to learn more. Hopefully you have some time to dig into all of our white papers and PowerPoint presentations that we've been publishing over the last year. All right, before we head into the nitty-gritty details, wanted to just have a pause here to see if anyone has any big picture questions or comments about the cost model before we dig into the remainder of the presentation, where we're going to cover other essential infrastructure, a new private well, bottled water, and our interim solutions. Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hand. Awesome. Oh, we got one. Hey, Grant, should be able to unmute yourself.
This is Grant. Can you hear me?
Yes, Grant, go ahead.
Excellent. I'm curious as to know whether this detailed model is going to help you evaluate the greatest good for the greatest number of water households or people. In other words, do you have some sort of ranking tool in there when you look at multiple at-risk utilities and help you decide which one has priority? Or is this limited to an independent analysis of each separate at-risk or dysfunctional utility? Thank you.
Thank you, Grant, for your question. So the cost model looks at identifying our best modeled long-term and interim solution for each failing and at-risk system and community, and develop a rolled up cost estimate, if you will. And the cost information is not used to prioritize any individual system or community. What the cost information does per water system as we aggregate it up at the state level, it helps us better understand what the needs are across the state so that we can figure out what we should be prioritizing now and in the future. So you'll see when we get to the end of the presentation where we have some of our preliminary results, you'll see that, for example, we added new private well to the model, and that represents quite a significant chunk of the cost increase for our results compared to 2021. And so that information can be used by our program, by the legislature, and others to say, hey, we've got drought years coming up. The cost for constructing new private wells is quite high, and it's projected to be highest in these regions of the state, because we can break it down by county. We can talk about SDAC and DAC communities, and it helps us know, okay, well, maybe we need to work with these counties to figure out how we can leverage our resources most efficiently to ensure that these folks get the help that they need. So again, it's really supposed to help with kind of decision making around where we should be targeting resources and where there is a need. But it's not supposed to rank individual water systems or communities in terms of priority. So Grant, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. It does. I would maintain that this is a good model for looking at individual utilities, but I would be happy to see a separate analysis on, with the presumption the state doesn't have enough money to serve everyone. They figure out a good way to prioritize that avoids the politics that invariably get involved in this type of issue.
Yeah. Thank you, Grant. Really appreciate your feedback today. All right. Does anyone else have a question or comment? I don't see anything in Q&A. Feel free to raise your hand if you're participating via Zoom. I'm going to ask my team if anyone has submitted a question or comment to our inbox. Okay. Seeing no movement, I'm going to move on. And I want to introduce Moj Kamas from our team. She is our cost model lead in the needs analysis unit. She's been working with an amazing team of folks to help us rethink the model and update all of the underlying cost assumptions within the model. Moj, are you with us?
Thank you, Kristen. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you confirm that you can hear me clear?
Yes.
Okay. Again, thank you so much, Kristen, for the presentation. And I will be walking you guys through the rest of the cost model presentation. It will get very technical and very complicated, so I really appreciate your patience in advance. I will be walking you through the remainder of the presentation. So we will take a journey talking about the additional modeled long-term solutions, interim solutions, TA and admin, and all the other remainder parts of the modifiers and the multipliers. Next slide, please. Okay. So first of all, we will be talking about the additional modeled long-term solutions applied for public water systems. And when we say additional long-term solutions, here we are talking about three things mainly. First of all, other essential infrastructure, and those are mainly infrastructure upgrades modeled for individual at-risk and failing public water systems. So for example, meters, backup generators, new wells, well replacement, etc. And also we're talking about technical assistance and administrator assistance. Before we dive into the details of the long-term solutions, I would like to emphasize that in an effort to update all the underlying cost assumptions within the cost estimate, within the cost model, the team collaborated to do a fabulous internal and external outreach. We started by reviewing all the material and the documentation from our previous model. From 2021, we met with many consultant firms located in California, with many vendors and manufacturers trying to validate the cost assumptions or getting an updated quotes for individual cost units. We also made sure to utilize any available internal data through the LGTS, so utilizing any state water board funding projects. And when applicable and available, we reached out to water systems that trying to collect any available real life data, cost information from them. And as always, we consulted with our internal work group that consists of expert engineers from our division of drinking water and also division of financial assistance. How we came up to our recommendations and selections for each cost assumptions is fully documented in our white paper in Appendix E specifically. So I would really encourage you, if you are interested in learning more, to please visit Appendix A to get like a deep insight to each one of these cost assumptions. Okay. Other essential infrastructure. So in this slide and in the coming one, I will be talking about other essential infrastructure, trying to compare the way that was being conducted and the old model and comparing it to our recommended update. So one of the main big differences between other essential infrastructure in the old model and in the current model, that the old model utilized blanket assumptions, so percentages. Those percentages were developed based on a case study in Kern County. So basically, our contractors costed out, let's say, meter costs for all failing and at-risk public water systems, and then eventually they assumed that only 31% of these systems are in need of meters, and this 31% came from the results of a Kern County study. So they did not specifically utilize system level information. And the same was for backup power and the rest of the list. So the main change that we are doing this year is we are tailoring the cost and the need per each water system, utilizing system level information that we have it stored in our database. So like in SWRCB. Also, we are utilizing water systems responses to the electronic annual report. So if I would use the same example for meters, to come up with the cost for individual water systems and cost out meters, we would not use a blanket assumption of 31%. Instead, we would check their response in the EAR and see the count of the end meter service connection. And based on the reported count by the water system, then we would come up with our cost assumptions. And that was the case across all other OEI items. And of course, we had to make some assumptions here and there to caveat for voluntary reported data from water systems. So that was the main, the biggest change that we are utilizing and proposing to utilize water system information, and the previous model utilized blanket assumptions based on a case study. A second change that I would like to call out, that we are including a new item, which is well sounder. So well sounder is basically a device that's used to measure a static well level. It was not included in the old model. However, we are proposing to include it, to align with the Senate Bill 552 requirement. Also, we're excluding land acquisition for storage tank, and also excluding distribution system, since we don't have any, sufficient system level information at this time. We also incorporating for managerial assistance, we are incorporating it into administrator instead of applying 80% and assuming 80% of the systems are in need. We are excluding land acquisition for a new well, similar to the land acquisition for a storage tank. And for well replacement and a second well, we are trying to tailor the need, again, based on the water system needs rather than applying assumptions. Well pump and motor was only included whenever a second well or a well replacement was needed. Okay, so that was all about other essential infrastructure. Now I will talk about technical assistance. So the systems that were assessed for technical assistance, the State Water Board is trying to kind of develop a criteria that more closely aligns with the technical assistance program eligibilities. So the screen that you see here represents a comparison between the systems assessed in the old model versus our recommended update. So we are recommending, based on our program eligibilities, to cost out a technical assistance for failing and at-risk systems that have a service connection less than 3,300, and they have to be DAC and SDAC. And we are still excluding high-risk state smalls and domestic wells. Excuse me. Okay. So for the cost assumptions and durations for technical assistance, the State Water Board staff reviewed the 50 recent technical assistance state-funded projects. And we are proposing to maintain 5 years of technical assistance duration for failing systems and at-risk public water systems where physical consolidation was modeled. We're also proposing to increase the unit cost. So it was $300,000 in the old model. We are proposing to increase it to $425,000. We are also proposing to lower the duration for at-risk public water systems where physical consolidation was not selected by the model to 2 years, and lower the unit cost to $44,000 instead of $60,000. For administrator, the slide that you see here again compares the old model with the recommended update. To define what systems were assessed for administrator, we are trying to come up with eligibility criteria that aligns with the administrator policy handbook that was recently published. The old model did not account for administrator in the old cost assessment model. However, we are recommending to model an administrator for failing and at-risk systems. So 500 service connection is the cut for failing systems. They have to be disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged communities and have a high TMF capacity score in the risk assessment. For at-risk systems, we are going smaller. So systems with less than 200 service connection, they still have to be DAC or SDAC, and also they have to have a high TMF capacity score and the risk assessment. For high-risk state smalls and domestic wells, they were excluded from the administrator appointment.
Moj, do you want to define TMF for folks with us?
Sure. So TMF is an abbreviation for technical, managerial, and financial.
Thanks, Moj.
Sure. Okay. So the previous slide was talking about the systems assessed for administrator. This one is talking about how we came up with the unit cost. So to come up with the unit cost for assigning and modeling an administrator, the State Water Board staff reviewed all the 8 administrator projects because since 2021, we only had been initiating 8 administrator projects that includes appointment and funding. And to come up with the cost, we took the average cost for all the systems, and the cost came to about $733,000. And we are proposing to use this cost and utilize it as the administrator cost. And we, of course, welcome any feedback and recommendation on any enhancements.
Thanks, Moj. Moj, do you want to speak quickly for folks who may not know the difference between administrator assistants and technical assistants? Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I can go ahead.
So technical assistance is typically we have some nonprofit and for-profit contracts with different organizations like RCAC, Self-Help, who come in and they help a water system or community for usually a short period of time on a particular project. It could be anywhere from doing a rate study to helping to develop an asset management plan, or maybe a CIP, a capital improvement plan, or maybe helping them think through how they're going to fund or finance a capital investment that they need to make in the future. We've been offering at the State Water Board technical assistance to our water systems for decades now. It is funding for that not only comes from our SAFER program, but it's also supported from our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program and others. Administrator assistance is much more robust, and it's where the state is essentially appointing an entity to make more of the managerial decisions for that water system. We got administrator assistance only a few years ago, which is why there has been only 8 projects since 2021. And again, it's something that is a new authority for the State Water Board that we're seeing kind of the cost data and the duration of administrator assistance kind of change over time as that program and that new tool is starting to be utilized by the state. But it is much more hands-on and long-term compared to technical assistance. So thanks, Moj. Wanted to just make sure that that was clear for folks who may not know the difference between the two.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, so discussion topic. Now that you have like a big picture overview on the additional long-term solutions, I would like to open it for discussion and ask about how you feel about the proposed changes for how the cost assessment model assess the needs for other essential infrastructure, technical assistance, and administrator assistance. I would encourage you to put your question or like comment in the chat box, or like raise your hand, since we have a very small group today.
Thanks, Moj. We have a few questions from Grant in Q&A. And Grant, I see your hand is up. Do you want to ask your questions? I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself.
Hello again. Thank you for opening it up. My question is, you've described admin assistance as being $750,000, but you didn't define a duration. Can you offer that insight?
2 years. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, it is in the white paper, but realize not in the slides. It is for a 2-year appointment.
I understand. And a follow-up question is, I assume that the implementation of admin assistance takes more cost than ongoing. So would you guess that it's $500,000 for implementing it and then $250,000 per year thereafter?
It's hard for us to say. I think we would have to share your question with the Division of Financial Assistance that oversees the administrator projects, who could provide more of a breakdown of how those costs are allocated.
I understand. By the way, I think that's a very important element of sustaining a utility. So
Yes.
good job.
Thanks, Grant. Do you have any other questions or comments for us, Grant?
Not at this time.
Okay, I do see one from the Q&A box that you provided earlier, which is around the distribution cost, indicating that distribution replacement is pretty essential and probably a critical cost for long-term viability of a system. We completely agree with you. It's kind of painful that we have to exclude it from the cost model. And we have to exclude it because we do not have any data from public water systems on, honestly, not even on the size of their distribution system or their need for replacement. So we're hoping in the future we can start collecting more information about water system asset management activities and needs so that we could incorporate distribution replacement within the model. But that is an extremely expensive activity, and one that I don't think we would want to make blanket assumptions around for all water systems.
Am I still live?
Unless anyone have a good idea on how we could do that. We're open to ideas.
I would suggest that you are completely correct in that distribution system is extremely expensive to replace, certainly, and very costly to maintain. However, it remains an integral element of your analysis. I don't have any easy solution other than to say that in many cases, a low density distribution system maybe the people are asking for services that aren't really justified given their distance from the source of supply. So you'll have to ultimately you'll have to get that information in order to make prudent decisions on cost allocation or decisions on how to allocate funding.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. Appreciate it. Okay, I see a comment or question from Eric. Eric is asking, does the State Water Board provide technical assistance to any systems that fall outside of the parameters costed by the proposed change? For example, is technical assistance being provided to systems with more than 3,300 connections that are non-DAC? Eric, I think that's a good question. I do believe that DAC status is a requirement for technical assistance funding. The service connection piece, I think, is a little bit more flexible, but we'd have to confirm with our colleagues over at the Division of Financial Assistance. I think, though, that for the purposes of the cost model, we didn't want to dramatically overestimate technical assistance or administrative assistance need. And that is why we were limiting our analysis to those DAC small water systems, so that our cost estimate is a little bit more in line with the demand and the need that we're seeing for technical assistance. Hopefully that makes sense. If you feel like we should be changing our assumptions in the model, we'd love to hear your thoughts around that. Just raise your hand if you're interested in sharing. If not, we could always connect offline. I'm going to allow you to talk. You should be able to unmute yourself, Eric.
Thanks, Kristen. And I have to head out here soon, but I just appreciate your answer on the question. And then I had a follow-up question. I think if I remember correctly, the slides also outlined that you didn't cost technical assistance for small water systems and domestic wells. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then have you looked at some of the costs for providing technical assistance to some of those state small water systems or domestic wells for the projects the State Water Board is working on already?
We have not. The decision was made internally to continue to exclude those locations from this analysis at this time. But if your suggestion is to include them, we'd want to learn more about that. And always happy to hear your feedback.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I think one of the cause for some of the questions, both the first and the second, is some of the technical assistance costs for state small water systems and domestic wells, at least in terms of community outreach and engagement, is an additional cost that we've experienced. And so find it important to include those in the cost for the statewide cost assessment. So I guess just some thoughts that lead to those questions.
No, I appreciate that, Eric. I would say that for our other long-term solutions like physical consolidation and centralized treatment for state smalls and domestic wells, the capital and O&M cost estimates do include outreach and engagement cost components. So it is kind of embedded in those cost estimates. It's just not called out here in technical assistance.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we've got two more questions in chat. We've got one from Danielle. Was direct O&M, which is operation and maintenance costs, included in the cost assessment, or were those costs embedded into a category? Moj, do you want to talk about what we're costing O&M for?
Sure. So O&M cost was included for systems that were receiving centralized treatment. So any system that was receiving centralized treatment, we were supposed to cost out operational and maintenance costs for it. But in this version of the preliminary results, we only have capital costs listed for these systems. However, for decentralized treatment, we are trying to include capital and O&M costs for these systems, and there are some certain categories for what are O&M components under these decentralized treatment. Everything is detailed in the white paper. I would, strongly encourage you to take a look and see what's included under the O&M decentralized treatment umbrella. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, Moj, and I would just clarify. So we do cost out in what we'll have in our final report in 2024. Both long-term O&M for decentralized and centralized treatment. We also include it for interim decentralized treatment and bottled water. So it is for both long-term and interim for around treatment. O&M is included, but for the paper that we just published, it would have taken us too long to try to do O&M for long-term solutions. So we only included it for the interim. I know it's a bit confusing, but it is in there. And Danielle, hopefully you can follow along. If not, we're happy to discuss with you on a side chat. Okay, we've got one more question. Roy is asking, he's wondering about land in connecting and also about maintenance. Roy, do you want to clarify your question about land for us? It would be helpful. You want to raise your hand and I can unmute you. There we go. You should be able to unmute yourself now, Roy.
Thank you. And first, let me thank you for a nice presentation. And apologies if this is a very primitive question, but with regard to land, the consolidation in connecting two systems and the consolidation, how is that land going to be obtained and then also maintained and the pipeline maintained? And the cost of that. So that's principally the my question. And apologies if it's already in the white paper. I didn't get to read that yet.
No, that's a fabulous question. I appreciate you asking it. We do not look at land acquisition for our modeled physical consolidation analysis. The assumption in the model is that the pipeline connecting the public water system to the new water system, that pipeline would be laid along a road route. And that's kind of the distance that our GIS, our physical analysis, is costing out. We look at our cost assumptions in physical consolidation, look at labor, pipeline cost, we look at connection fees, and just a few other things, but we don't have enough information locally to try to pinpoint where we would need to cost out land acquisition. And honestly, I think it would be challenging to figure out prices for that around the state. Unless you have any suggestions, I'm open.
No,
to
no,
hearing.
I agree. That would be a tremendously difficult problem. Yeah, so no, I'm sorry, but I was just curious. Yeah. So
I think it's a fabulous question, and I think you all recognize then the challenge in some of the work that we're doing here. We have to make a lot of assumptions. In some places, we're okay making some assumptions, and in others, we're just not comfortable doing it, which is why some of these are excluded from the analysis, which is why these high-level cost estimates that we're generating, should be taken with a grain of salt. We're doing our best. It's an estimate. In some cases, we might be a little over, we might be a little under, because there are these assumptions within the model, things that are included or not included. So Roy, it's a good question, and it's a good reminder of what you should be thinking about when you look at these cost numbers.
yeah, well, those are questions you could always derive as you narrow in on projects. But yeah, so but as a model, as a first derivative of obtaining priorities and that, yeah, it makes sense, the features you have. So
yeah, well, I appreciate it, Roy. Thank you. Alrighty, I don't see any other hands, Moj, and I don't see any other questions in the question box, but
Okay.
we are going to have other discussion pauses. So if you have any other questions or comments, we can always circle back to them. So Moj, you
Sure.
want to continue?
Of course. Thank you, Kristen. Now we're going to talk about additional modeled long-term solutions. Previously, we talked about public water systems. Now we will switch to talk about high-risk state, smalls, and domestic wells. So the solutions that you see here, physical consolidation, decentralized treatment, new private well, and bottled water, are all long-term solutions proposed and modeled for high-risk state, smalls, and domestic wells. Physical consolidation and decentralized treatment were discussed early on in July's and October's workshops, and I would really encourage you to visit the white papers. We have detailed information about the methodology and the recommendation. However, today's focus is to talk about new private well, which is a brand new long-term solution, and also talk about bottled water. It's our last destination if all the other long-term solutions are not applicable or are not viable. Okay. So new private well, it's a brand new long-term solution modeled for state, smalls, and domestic wells that have areas with a high water shortage risk and where modeled physical consolidation is not viable. So since it's a brand new, we see that the old model has all NAs for the cost assumptions. And you see on the right-hand side, the detailed cost breakdown for all the components for the new private well cost. I'm not going to go through each one of these components, but just to highlight some important things here and there. For the well drilling, we are proposing to dig a well that's about 500 feet in depth, and we understand this is on the deeper or the higher end, but we recognize also that these new solutions, these new domestic and private wells are proposed where there is a high water shortage risk and potential drought. So we are recommending and proposing to model deeper wells to potentially avoid drought issues. So again, it's a 500 feet well with a unit cost of $65 per foot. How we came to this conclusion is broken down and detailed in the white paper. For all other solutions as well. I want to touch base on well pump and motor. We have two different quotes. One is for domestic well with a lower horsepower and lower GPMs, gallons per minute, a little bit higher horsepower and capacity for a state small water system. I want to also emphasize that we are including well permitting cost as well, and that well permitting is different for each county. So we are trying to match each location to the county and account for the well permitting costs specifically for that county. Also, based on our discussion with vendors and contractors, we are trying also to add any additional needs for a homeowner. So that's why we are accounting for a pressurized water tank with a unit cost of $400. We are also accounting for well destruction with a cost of $3,300. Also, additional parts and labor for $3,500. Next slide, please. Okay. So for long-term bottled water, for a duration of 10 years, we're proposing to model long-term bottled water for state smalls and domestic wells that have a high water quality risk, where modeled physical consolidation and decentralized treatment is not viable. The comparison that you see here compares our recommendation to our previous model in terms of the cost per gallon, very slight increase. So now we're accounting for 25 cents additional compared to the old model for the same volume per connection, which is 60 gallons. We are accounting for delivery fee and hand pump per connection at a cost of $22 and $11. They were both excluded from the previous model. Okay, so I want to open it for discussion to talk about your feedback on the long-term solutions for state smalls and domestic wells, and get a sense of your agreement on the addition of the new private wells specifically for high water shortage risk state smalls and domestic wells. Feel free to raise your hand or type your question.
We have a comment from Mike. Mike, do you want to read it out loud, or would you like me to do it? You can raise your hand if you'd like to participate. Okay. Mike is asking, 60 gallons per connection seems to miss the number of people per connection that might vary considerably. Mike, this information was provided to us from our emergency folks at the Division of Financial Assistance based on all of the projects that they've been funding for bottled water. It seems to be about the same. There hasn't been a dramatic need either up or down from the 60 gallons from the data that was shared with us. So we didn't see a need based on our conversations with DFA to change that volume. So if you have any data or information that would help us justify why we would need to go up from 60 gallons per connection, we'd love to see that information. But that is based on the projects that we've been funding, the bottled water systems we've been providing over the last number of years. Okay. I don't see any other hands or comments, so we'll keep going. I know we've got a few more things we need to cover.
Okay. Interim solutions. So we have two interim solutions in our cost model. Those are decentralized treatment and bottled water. We understand there might be other interim solutions out there, but we are basing it based on the data available to us. So the State Water Board recognizes that long-term solutions takes a long time to be implemented, years, and in the meanwhile, we are proposing to offer interim solutions to communities that are DAC and SDAC to ensure that they have access to safe and affordable drinking water. We are also assuming that non-DAC systems are able to afford interim solutions under their budgets, and they're able to maintain safe and affordable drinking water while the long-term solutions are being implemented. We're also, I want to make sure that we're excluding at-risk public water systems from interim solutions. So interim decentralized treatment is modeled for systems that are failing or at high risk due to water quality challenges. And their long-term solution is either physical consolidation or centralized treatment. These systems have to be DAC and SDAC with service connection less than 3,300. We are proposing to cut the duration based on available funding data from 6 years for failing systems to 3 years, and from 9 years for both state smalls and domestic wells to 3 years for state smalls and 2 years for domestic wells. So we understand this is a sharp decrease in the duration of supply, but this was based on data that we have from internally funded projects. Interim bottled water was modeled for failing or high-risk systems in state smalls and domestic wells due to water quality, also to water shortage challenges. And where modeled interim decentralized treatment was not viable or was not applicable for any reason, like microbial contamination or high concentration of certain analytes. Systems need to be DAC and SDAC or SDAC with service connection less than 3,300. Similar to the decentralized treatment, we are proposing to reduce the supply duration from 6 and 9 years to 3 and 2 years. Okay. Do you agree with the proposed changes to the modeled interim solutions based on what we've shared with you so far? I appreciate your feedback.
Don't see any comments or questions. I know that the duration change is quite large, but it is based on what we're seeing in the field. But if you have different thoughts, opinions, or information, we really want to hear from you all, and it can be after this webinar. We don't need to, we're not pressing you for just today only. You've got lots of time to get back to us. All right, Moj, let's keep moving.
Thank you. Talking about cost modifiers and multipliers, in terms of calculating the cost, we had to do many adjustments to the cost to bring it to, kind of current market prices. And most of these multipliers are, can you share the second slide, please? Thank you. So most of these multipliers were based while we were interacting with our internal and external folks. We have many multipliers here, but the way that those applied is based on many factors, like, for example, the age of the component and also the source of the data. We also look at the region where the infrastructure is taking place, and accordingly, we will apply, for example, regional cost adjustments. Also, the number of adjustments and multipliers applied also depends on the nature of the capital investment. So the coming slide will kind of show you kind of a check mark, if you can share. Yeah, please. So the slide that you see here shows you the modeled long-term solutions and also all the applied multipliers. And whenever you see a check mark, that means that this long-term solution received this multiplier or modifier. First conclusion and first kind of, by the first look, we can see that all model long-term solutions received both regional cost adjustments and inflation adjustments. Second observation, by looking at this table, that centralized treatment and physical consolidation, since those two long-term solutions were very intense in terms of the capital upgrades, received most of the multipliers in an attempt to bring these costs kind of close to real market prices and real life projects. I want to emphasize that overhead adjustment and engineering was only applied to the centralized treatment, while SECO was applied to consolidation, storage tank, and a public well supply. So now that you have a sense of the multipliers and the modifiers applied for each long-term solution, how do you feel and how do you agree with the list of applied multipliers? Do you think that we should add or remove any of them? Do you have any recommendations for us today?
Moj, there's a question from Mike on why an engineering multiplier was not included for physical consolidation.
So that's a very good question. One of the things that we did when we started applying those multipliers is we reviewed many projects internally, and also we did a lot of external outreach. We tried to kind of replicate all the multipliers that were present in those real life projects, and we accounted for everything and that was available in these projects. But if you think that we need to account for engineering multiplier, we really welcome your feedback, and we might, connect with you individually to learn more about your recommendation.
Yeah, Mike, if you have anything to add on that, we'd appreciate it. And again, always happy to have a follow-up call with you if you have any suggestions. Mike does have a question from the previous section, Moj. We moved on too quickly. And he was asking whether or not management decisions are going to be driven by the cost model assumptions. Like, for example, are we only going to be providing 3 years of bottled water service for projects? And I can take this one on. Absolutely not, Mike. Our cost model is not our cost model underlying assumptions that help us get to a price tag don't drive decision making. So they drive how we come up with a cost estimate. So local decision makings that we make for funding, for projects, are all done with the communities, with our service providers, and with a lot of expertise from our own staff to make the best decision for each community given our resources and what we're allowed to do. So what we have in the model often reflects some of the restrictions that we have with our funding and decision making, but it is not used as decision making criteria for these projects. So appreciate the question. Let's see. And Mike is saying he's happy to chat with us. James is saying, would also suggest adding a multiplier of engineering to a public water system well. So thanks, James. I think that's another good suggestion. So Moj, let's take note of it. Engineering multiplier for physical consolidation and a public water system well. We may need to follow up and do a little bit more research on that.
Sure. Thank you so much for the feedback.
Cool. Mike is saying, whose overhead is that? It's project overhead. Mike, I'm gonna unmute you. Maybe you want to add a bit more to that one. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious. I was trying to figure out where that overhead, whose budget that overhead sits in. Is it whoever's providing this service? Is it the state's overhead? Is it the system's overhead? I was trying to figure out what that overhead is describing.
Moj, do you want me to cover that?
No,
Yeah.
I can
Oh,
attempt, and then you can elaborate if you want.
Sure.
So thank you for your question. So the overhead is kind of a wiggle budget that we account and model for to account for any uncertainties in the budget. So based on our exposure to the data that we reviewed and the recommendation that we got, overhead is something that accounts for additional planning, staff time, that's anticipated to be needed, any change in supply chains, so anything that is last minute. And I think we have a detailed description of what overhead might look like in the white paper, but I hope that kind of at least answered a bit of your question.
And I think, Mike, for who is it for? And it covers the cost of the project, which is ultimately we're not making assumptions around who's paying for it, but it's for the total cost of the project. The cost model does not assume who's paying for what, but it is supposed to come up with a what we think the total project cost might be, especially for centralized treatment. What we're looking at here is the upfront capital cost associated with getting treatment installed. Does that answer your question, Mike, or maybe we need to dig in further? Okay, he says it does in chat. Thank you, Mike. Alrighty. No other questions. So Moj, we're gonna keep plowing through this. Okay.
Okay. Being cognizant of time, I will try to summarize for you the preliminary cost assessment results in the coming few slides. Before I share with you the preliminary cost results, I would like to emphasize that these numbers were based on an older data. So we were utilizing failing lists as of January 1st, 2023 for public water systems and state smalls and domestic wells. We were utilizing the 2023 risk assessment results. And as we work and publish the 2024 drinking water needs assessment, there will be a change in the inventory of systems. And also we will be incorporating a lot of public feedback if applicable, which might all feed into a change in the final cost assessment results, both inventory-wise and cost-wise. I know this is very overwhelming, but the two tables that you see here on the screen represents the preliminary counts of systems per system type receiving modeled long-term solution. And it's very hard to like make a quick comparison, but I will try and help guide you kind of summarize the big changes here. So first of all, I would like to focus on physical consolidation. I know one of the things that kind of triggered us streamlining and simplifying our updated cost assessment was that in the previous model, more systems were receiving decentralized treatment rather than physical consolidation. And if you look at the gray table, if you look at the decentralized treatment, you'll see 35% of the failing systems were assigned and modeled decentralized treatment compared to only 20% got physical consolidation. But after we simplified and streamlined our cost assessment model, we are very proud to share the results with you that now we have a lot more systems being modeled physical consolidation. So we have 43% of the failing systems compared to 20% from before. We have more at-risk public water systems, and of course, we have more high-risk state smalls and domestic wells. Also, I want to emphasize that high-risk state smalls and domestic wells, we are already starting with the higher counts of systems. So if you look 810 for state small water systems, almost the double from the 2021 results. And more than the double for domestic wells. And this is because the 2021 results were analyzing state smalls and domestic wells that are at high risk of water quality only. But after the enhancement and the changes in the risk assessment methodology for state smalls and domestic wells, that evolved, and the counts that you see here, the 810 and the 154,000-ish, are based on state smalls and domestic wells that are at high risk for not only water quality, but also water shortage. I want to also emphasize that we have a new solution. So we have a new private well. We have a lot of state small water systems and domestic wells receiving this long-term solution. It was a brand new solution that did not exist in the previous model. So we see a lot of systems getting this solution eventually. So that was about the count. To summarize it, we have more consolidations. We have a new solution that's a new well. Systems are, we have a lot of systems in state smalls and domestic wells category. Now we're trying to put these counts into cost numbers. The table that you see here is very overwhelming. What it shows is basically the cost breakdown in millions for each, system type. One of the biggest differences that I want to highlight today is the total estimated cost. So if you look here, the estimated total based on our proposed changes is about 10.57 billion compared to 4.56 billion. So Across the board, our numbers are much higher. So it's our assumption is about 6 billion higher, which is 132% higher than what we had in the 2021 model. But this can be attributed to many things. I would like, first of all, to say that a new private well accounted for a big chunk of that increase. So around 48% of the capital cost increase was related to the new well, because it accounts for 2.8 billion. Also, we have seen an increase in overall prices in terms of a new public well, storage tank. All the cost assumptions went up from the 2021 model. Next slide, please. Okay, so for interim solutions, the 2021 model, it was hard to parse out the counts for systems that received bottled water versus decentralized treatment. But generally speaking, we have about less systems failing that are receiving interim solutions, so 47% compared to 65%. And this is like a change that depends on the number of DAC and SDAC systems, the initial count of the failing systems. For public water systems, no change. For state smalls and domestic wells, we have a lot more systems now receiving interim solutions, and I can't emphasize this enough, but we are already starting with the higher counts for state smalls and domestic wells in the first place. Okay, now talking about the cost to implement interim solutions. I know this is too much to share, but I would like to highlight a few things here. So the first year cost, if we look at the very last column, the 362 million, this is the total cost of implementing the first year of both bottled water and decentralized treatment. It's much higher than 172 million from the 2021 results. But if we look at the full duration estimated costs, we have 514 million compared to almost 1 billion. So this is because we are proposing to cut the duration significantly from 6 and 9 years to 2 and 3 years. That's why our estimated total was much less than the full duration from the 2021 results. Just to wrap everything up, this slide kind of shows big highlights here. Our cost estimates are 6.1 billion higher, so 132% higher from the 2021 cost estimate. And this is attributed to many reasons. First of all, the new well and all the underlying cost assumptions went up. Also, compared to the 2021 cost assessment results, we have 23% more failing public water systems, 21% more at-risk public water systems, and also 23% more high-risk state small water systems and 9% more domestic wells, receiving physical consolidation as their long-term solution. Also, the estimated cost for constructing a new private well for those areas with a high water shortage risk is 2.86 billion. Again, this is contributing to about 48% of the cost increase in comparison to the 2021 cost assessment results. Okay, compared to the 2021 cost assessment results, how do the preliminary updated cost assessment results compare? Do these results align with your expectations?
Thanks, Moj. We do have a comment from Mike where he says 10 billion does seem like a lot, but it's only 3% of the annual California budget. Thanks, Mike. Yep. I think I'd just point out, like Moj said, our last cost model did not include that new private well. And constructing a new well or developing a new source of water for folks is significantly more expensive than installing treatment, either centralized or decentralized treatment. So constructing a new well, which we have for both public supply wells and private wells in our model, definitely contribute to a good chunk of that total cost estimate. Like Moj said, we are seeing prices just skyrocket, so much higher than they were when we costed out components back in 2019 for the 2021 model. The price associated with labor, materials. I think a lot of you who work on infrastructure projects can probably attest to how much higher we're seeing these different cost components go up. I will encourage you all to take a look at our 3 white papers and the appendices. We do have every cost component out there. You saw the slide earlier with the private well. We document all of the research we did to get to each individual cost component. If you think something's too high, we would love to hear from you on what's too high and where we would lower it and what data you have to back that up. We would definitely appreciate it. Let's see. Mike is asking if we have considered cost model factoring in sustainability and clean water as an asset that has more value and achieved sooner. You know, Mike, I don't think we're doing that type of analysis here. You know, I think honestly, there's other types of analysis that folks have asked for that would be a higher priority, like looping in affordability. But do you want to share your thoughts a little bit more with the group? You can raise your hand and I'll unmute you if you'd like to.
Am I still unmuted?
Oh, yep, you go for it.
I was just thinking that this cost model, in our talk about cost, we're not talking about value, right? And when we spend money on something that has value, we don't think about the cost as much, or at least we balance the cost to the value. And I was just thinking out loud that the changes you've made to this cost model is predicting costs on solutions that will bring more people into compliance and have clean drinking water sooner. And so the value of those expenditures is higher than if we spread it out over more time. Anyway,
Right.
It may not be helpful to the discussion today, but that's where you had me thinking.
I appreciate that, especially if we talk about health outcomes and other things. There's an equity component to this as well, I'd argue, but a point well made. Thank you, Mike. I know we're over on our time. We're over by 5 minutes. So we're gonna just power through this. Moj, I'm just gonna take over right here. We are looking for public feedback on all of the proposed changes that we've been sharing with you all. And hopefully you can provide feedback by January 19th. We are at the very end of our cost model rebuild process. We're hoping to release the final cost model results in our April needs assessment report. We incorporate feedback and recommendations as they come in. We review everything with our internal work group to figure out if we're going to incorporate it or if we need to pass on a recommendation, and we document why. But we do really appreciate all of the feedback that you all give, either in writing or verbally on these workshops or on calls. So again, please submit feedback. We would love to hear from you. I wanted to have some time for open discussion. If we can sit here for another few minutes, we're definitely here to answer questions that you have or listen to your feedback. We're not going to shut things down immediately, but we understand if you need to run. I'm going to see if there has been any comments or feedback through our inbox. It doesn't look like it. Anyone else have a comment, question? Okay. Well, I know this was a long workshop and we really appreciate your feedback. Again, this is not the end. You definitely have time to sit with what we've presented today, to comb through our materials and send us any recommendations that you come up with in January. So happy holidays to everybody. Happy New Year as well. And hopefully we'll have you on future workshops as we try to enhance this over time. So take care, everybody.